The afternoon sun streamed through the stained glass windows of Our Lady of Grace Church like golden honey, casting rainbow patterns across the white satin and pearl beading of what should have been the most perfect wedding dress Cedar Falls had ever seen. At the altar stood Katarina Thorne, radiant in her custom gown, her blonde hair swept into an elegant updo, crowned with her grandmother's vintage tiara, her hands trembling just slightly as she held Michael Brennan's calloused fingers. To the 150 guests filling the wooden pews, she looked like any other nervous bride on the most important day of her life. But the way her pale blue eyes swept the chapel's exits, the subtle shift in her posture that kept her weight balanced on the balls of her feet, and the almost imperceptible bulge beneath the lace at her right thigh, where most brides would never think to conceal anything. These details whispered of a woman who had never truly learned to stop calculating threats, even on her wedding day. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Father Anthony Rivers had just begun the traditional opening words when Kate's peripheral vision caught the movement. A man in a black suit, too formal for a wedding guest, too tense for ceremony, slipped through the chapel's rear doors. His hand moved to his earpiece as his eyes found hers across the sea of seated guests. Kate's breathing remained steady, her smile never faltered, but every nerve in her body snapped to attention. She knew that walk, that posture, that particular brand of controlled urgency that came with federal clearance and classified briefings. Michael squeezed her hands gently, mistaking her sudden stillness for wedding jitters. "You okay, beautiful?" he whispered, his brown eyes warm with the kind of love that had convinced her she could finally leave the shadows behind. For 3 years, he'd known her as Kate Thorne, the security consultant who'd moved to Cedar Falls to start fresh, to build something normal. He knew she'd served in the military, knew she preferred cash to credit cards and always sat facing the door in restaurants, but he'd never pressed for details about the years that had carved those careful habits into her soul. "I'm perfect," she murmured back, and for a moment, surrounded by white roses and the faces of people who'd become her chosen family, she almost believed it. Father Rivers cleared his throat and raised his voice to carry across the chapel. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today in the sight of God and in the face of this congregation to join together this man and this woman in holy matrimony." The familiar words washed over the assembled guests like a warm tide, but Kate's attention had split. The man in black was moving closer, navigating the side aisle with the precise, unhurried steps of someone who'd done this before. She cataloged his approach: 6 feet even, mid-40s, graying at the temples, the slight bulge of a shoulder holster under his jacket, and the particular way he held his left arm that suggested recent injury. The congregation rose as one when Father Rivers gestured, hymnals rustling, but Kate remained hyper-aware of the anomaly threading through the traditional tableau. In her former life, anomalies meant blown covers, compromised operations, or worse. 3 years of civilian life hadn't dulled those instincts. It had only taught her to bury them deeper. "The bond and covenant of marriage was established by God in creation," Father Rivers continued, his voice carrying the weight of decades spent joining couples in this very spot. Kate's mother dabbed at her eyes in the front row, overcome with joy at seeing her daughter finally settling down with a good man. Michael's father adjusted his tie nervously, still not quite believing his architect's son had won the heart of the mysterious woman who'd transformed his boy's life. The man in black had reached the midpoint of the chapel now, and Kate caught the subtle hand signal he directed toward the altar. 3 fingers, thumb across palm. Code for immediate extraction required. Her heart rate spiked, but her breathing remained controlled. She'd been out for 3 years, officially classified as inactive, her security clearance downgraded to need-to-know civilian status. What could possibly require her immediate attention on what was supposed to be the first day of her new life? "Marriage is not to be entered into lightly or unadvisedly," Father Rivers intoned, completely unaware of the silent communication occurring in his sanctuary, but reverently, discreetly, advisedly, and in the fear of God. Kate felt Michael's thumb trace gentle circles across her knuckles, a gesture that had become his signature way of calming her during the rare moments when her carefully constructed piece showed cracks. He had no idea that beneath the flowing silk and French lace, she was conducting a threat assessment that would have impressed her former commanding officers. The man in black wasn't alone. She'd spotted his partner near the chapel's sound booth, a woman with short auburn hair and the particular stillness that came with federal training. 2 agents, coordinated approach, no visible weapons drawn but ready to move fast. The chapel's acoustics carried Father Rivers' voice perfectly as he moved into the next section of the ceremony. Into this holy union, Katarina Marie Thorne and Michael James Brennan now come to be joined. Kate squeezed Michael's hand slightly, drawing his attention. His eyes, so trusting and full of love, searched her face with the concern of a man who'd learned to read the subtle shifts in his fiancée's expressions. "Kate," he whispered, low enough that only she could hear over the ceremony. "What's wrong?" She opened her mouth to reassure him, to lie with the same skill that had kept her alive through a dozen covert operations. But before she could speak, her encrypted phone, the one that wasn't supposed to exist anymore, the one she'd kept active against every regulation and common sense, vibrated once against her thigh. The signal was unambiguous. Priority Alpha. Immediate response required. Lives in imminent danger. The sound was barely audible, but it might as well have been a fire alarm. Kate's trained mind instantly shifted gears, muscle memory overriding 3 years of civilian conditioning. Her stance subtly adjusted, weight shifting forward, ready to move. The guests continued to beam at the romantic scene unfolding before them, completely unaware that their picture-perfect bride was receiving what might be the most important signal of her life. Father Rivers had reached the point in the ceremony where he traditionally asked if anyone present knew of any reason why the couple should not be wed. "If any of you can show just cause why they may not lawfully be married, speak now or forever hold your peace." The silence that followed wasn't the comfortable pause of a formality observed. It stretched like a held breath, weighted with possibilities. Kate felt Michael's thumb tighten around hers, felt the expectant joy of the congregation, felt the warm Wyoming sun streaming through ancient glass, and felt the cold certainty that everything was about to change. The man in black took another step forward, his hand moving away from his earpiece. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. "Ma'am," he said, addressing Kate directly, while the congregation turned in confusion, "we need to talk. Now." The fairy tale was over. The mission had just begun.
The chapel erupted into confused murmurs as Father Rivers stepped back, his weathered face creased with bewilderment. Michael's grip on Kate's hands tightened protectively, his body instinctively moving to shield her from the stranger who just disrupted their sacred moment. "Excuse me," Michael said, his voice carrying the controlled anger of a man protecting what he loved most. "But this is a private ceremony. You need to leave." The man in black didn't even glance at Michael. His steel-gray eyes remained locked on Kate's face, waiting. She could feel the weight of his stare, the unspoken urgency that accompanied priority alpha classifications. Around them, wedding guests shifted uncomfortably in their pews, her college roommates craning their necks to see what was happening. Michael's construction crew buddies already half standing as if ready to physically remove the intruder, her elderly aunt clutching her purse like a weapon. "Ma'am," the agent repeated, his tone brooking no argument. "Admiral Stone sent me. We have a Scarlet Thunder situation developing. Viktor Zaitsev surfaced 6 hours ago, 20 miles from here. 3 federal agents are already down." The words hit Kate like ice water. Viktor Zaitsev, the arms dealer she'd spent 18 months hunting through Eastern European black markets before her unit was disbanded, the man responsible for supplying weapons that had killed American soldiers, the ghost who'd vanished into the wind just as she'd gotten close enough to smell his cologne. He was supposed to be dead, eliminated by a drone strike in Chechnya 2 years ago. If he was alive, if he was here, then someone had been playing a very long game. Kate's training kicked in automatically, her mind shifting into operational mode even as her heart hammered against her ribs. "How many civilians in the immediate area?" she asked quietly, her voice so changed that Michael actually stepped back, seeing something in her face he'd never witnessed before. "Kate! What the hell is going on?" Michael demanded, confusion and hurt warring in his expression. "Who is Admiral Stone? What's Scarlet Thunder? And who the fuck is Viktor Zaitsev?" The profanity from gentle Michael, who rarely raised his voice and never cursed in front of her mother, somehow made the situation more real than any of the military jargon. Kate looked at the man she was supposed to marry, seeing him as if through a telescope, distant, separate from the world she was already mentally re-entering. 3 years of carefully constructed normalcy crumbled like a house of cards in a hurricane. "Kate," she began, then stopped. How could she explain that the woman he'd fallen in love with was built on foundations of classified operations and buried identities? That the security consulting business that had brought her to Cedar Falls was cover for early retirement from a unit so black it didn't officially exist? That she'd been trained to kill with everything from sniper rifles to dinner forks, and that right now, those skills were apparently needed again. The agent's partner had moved closer, her auburn hair catching the stained glass light as she positioned herself near the chapel's main exit. Kate recognized the formation, containment and control, designed to manage civilian populations during crisis extraction. They weren't just here to deliver a message. They were here to take her, with or without her cooperation. "We need to move, ma'am," the female agent said, her voice carrying the crisp authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. "The target is mobile and armed. Local law enforcement is already compromised." Kate's mother rose from the front pew, her face pale but determined. "Katarina Marie, you tell me right now what's happening. This is your wedding day, for heaven's sake." The bewilderment in her mother's voice cut deeper than any classified briefing ever could. This woman had raised her daughter alone after her father died in Desert Storm, had supported every choice Kate made, including the mysterious career that took her away for months at a time, and brought her home with scars she never fully explained.
Father Rivers found his voice, stepping forward with the moral authority of his office. "I don't know what kind of game this is, but you will not disrupt this sacred ceremony. If you have business with Miss Thorne, it can wait until after she's married." The irony wasn't lost on Kate. Everyone was trying to protect her from the very world she'd once dominated. She looked down at her hands, still intertwined with Michael's, noting how the diamond engagement ring he'd saved for 8 months to buy caught the light like a small star. Such a normal thing, that ring. Such a normal life they'd planned together. Kids, maybe a house by the lake, growing old on the porch swing he'd built last summer. Her encrypted phone buzzed again. This time, the vibration pattern was different. 3 short, 2 long, 3 short. SOS in Morse code. Someone was dying while she stood here in white silk and pearls, debating whether to abandon everything she'd built for everything she'd been. "Kate," Michael said softly, and when she looked up, she saw that he was really seeing her for the first time. Not the woman who made him coffee every morning and laughed at his terrible jokes, but someone else entirely. Someone dangerous. Someone who belonged to a world he'd never even imagined. "Tell me what's really going on, please." She pulled her hands free from his, the gesture feeling like cutting a lifeline. "Michael, her voice caught. "I'm not who you think I am." The admission hung in the air between them, weighted with 3 years of carefully maintained lies of omission. Around them, the chapel had fallen eerily quiet, 150 wedding guests straining to hear every word of a conversation that was dismantling everything they thought they knew about the bride. The male agent stepped closer, his patience clearly exhausted. "Ma'am, we're out of time. Zaitsev's team hit a federal convoy 30 minutes ago. They're moving toward population centers. You're the only operative with first-hand knowledge of his tactics and psychological profile. Admiral Stone has authorized immediate reactivation under Emergency Protocol 7. Kate felt the walls of her carefully constructed civilian life crumbling around her. Emergency Protocol 7 meant the situation was so critical that retired operators could be forcibly reactivated without consent. It meant people were going to die, lots of them, unless someone with very specific skills intervened immediately. She looked at Michael one more time, memorizing the phase she'd woken up to every morning for 3 years, the hands that had built her bookshelves and rubbed her shoulders after long days, the man who'd never asked her to be anything other than exactly who she appeared to be. "I have to go," she whispered. Michael's face went through a series of emotions: confusion, betrayal, understanding, and finally a terrible kind of resignation. "You're not coming back, are you?" he asked quietly. Kate didn't answer because they both already knew the truth. Some doors, once reopened, could never be closed again. And Viktor Zaitsev was a door she'd left hanging open when her unit was disbanded, a piece of unfinished business that was about to finish her instead. The silence in Our Lady of Grace Chapel stretched like a held breath. As Kate stepped back from the altar, her wedding gown rustling against the marble steps, the sound seemed amplified in the sacred space, each movement of silk and satin marking the end of one life and the reluctant beginning of another. Father Rivers clutched his prayer book to his chest, his eyes darting between the bride and the federal agents, as if he could somehow restore order to his disrupted sanctuary through sheer force of faith. "Everyone needs to remain calm and stay in their seats," the female agent announced to the congregation, her voice carrying the practiced authority of someone who'd managed panicked civilians before. "This is a matter of national security. No one leaves until we give the all clear." Kate's college roommate Jennifer half stood from her pew, her bridesmaid bouquet forgotten in her lap. "Kate, what's happening? Are you in some kind of trouble?" The concern in her voice was genuine, tinged with the confusion of someone watching her best friend transform into a stranger before her eyes. The male agent moved closer to Kate, lowering his voice, but not enough for Michael to hear every word. "Ma'am, Admiral Stone asked me to brief you on the situation. Viktor Zaitsev didn't just surface randomly. Intelligence suggests he's been planning something in this region for months. The federal convoy he hit was transporting classified materials, weapons-grade plutonium stolen from a decommissioned facility in Kazakhstan." Kate felt the blood drain from her face. Plutonium in Zaitsev's sirens wasn't just dangerous, it was apocalyptic. The arms dealer specialized in selling to the highest bidder, regardless of their intentions. If he had FISA material, every terrorist organization in the world would be beating down his door within hours. "How much?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Enough for 3 devices. Maybe 4 if he knows what he's doing. And, ma'am, based on your psychological profile from the Budapest operation, we both know he knows exactly what he's doing." Budapest. Kate closed her eyes for a moment, remembering the abandoned warehouse where she tracked Zaitsev 18 months earlier. She'd been so close she could smell his cigarettes, hear his voice through the walls as he negotiated with Chechen separatists. But her orders were surveillance only, and by the time authorization for termination came through, he'd vanished like smoke. 3 weeks later, American troops in Afghanistan were being killed by IEDs built with his signature explosive compounds. Michael stepped forward, his face pale but determined. "Kate, I don't understand most of what's happening here, but if people are going to die..." He swallowed hard, his carpenter's hands clenching and unclenching at his sides. "If you're the only one who can stop it, then you have to go." The selflessness in his voice nearly broke her. Here was the man she'd planned to spend her life with, watching that life dissolve in the real time, and instead of anger or accusations, he was giving her permission to leave him behind. Kate reached out and touched his face gently, memorizing the texture of his stubble, the warmth of his skin, the way his brown eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled. "I'm so sorry, Michael," she whispered. "This isn't how it was supposed to happen." "Ma'am," the female agent interrupted, tapping her earpiece, "we just lost contact with the surveillance team monitoring Zaitsev's last known position.
That's 4 federal agents down in the last 2 hours. And we're getting reports of unusual electromagnetic activity in the mountains, consistent with someone assembling a radiological dispersal device. A dirty bomb. Kate's mind raced through the implications. Cedar Falls had a population of 8,000, but it sat at the intersection of 3 major highways. If Zaitsev detonated a radiological device here, the contamination would spread across half the state within days. Hundreds of thousands of people would be affected, and the economic impact would be catastrophic.
Her mother appeared at her side, moving with the quiet dignity that had carried her through single parenthood and military widowhood. Katarina, she said softly, using the full name she'd given her daughter in honor of her own Polish grandmother. I may not understand what's happening, but I know that look in your eyes. It's the same one your father had when his unit was called up for Desert Storm. Kate turned to her mother, seeing not just the woman who'd raised her, but someone who'd already sacrificed one family member to the demands of duty. Mom, You don't need to explain, her mother interrupted gently. I always knew this day might come. I saw how you were when you first moved here, like someone running from something that would eventually catch up. I just hoped... Her voice trailed off as she straightened Kate's veil with trembling fingers. I hoped you'd have more time to be happy. The weight of her mother's understanding somehow made the decision both easier and infinitely harder. Kate looked around the chapel at the faces of people who'd welcomed her into their community without question. Mrs. Henderson from the library board, who'd helped her organize the annual book drive. Tom Kellerman, Michael's business partner, who taught her how to identify different types of wood. Sarah Martinez, the high school teacher who'd become her closest friend over evening runs through the park. All of them were staring at her with varying degrees of confusion, concern, and dawning realization that the woman they thought they knew had never really existed at all. The Kate Thorne who organized charity drives and made casseroles for church potlucks was about to disappear forever, replaced by someone whose very existence was classified above their security clearance. The male agent checked his watch with visible impatience. Ma'am, Admiral Stone has authorized a helicopter for immediate extraction. We can have you at the forward operating base in 20 minutes, fully equipped and briefed on current intelligence. But we need to move now. Every minute we delay gives Zaitsev more time to complete his device. Kate nodded slowly, then turned to address the congregation. Her voice carried across the chapel with surprising steadiness, though her hands were shaking beneath her bouquet. I know this doesn't make sense to any of you right now, and I'm sorry I can't explain everything. What I can tell you is that there are people in danger, and apparently I'm in a position to help them. That has to be enough. She handed her bouquet to her maid of honor, her hands lingering for a moment on the white roses and baby's breath she'd chosen so carefully just weeks ago. Then she reached under the flowing layers of her wedding gown and retrieved the compact Glock 19 she'd strapped to her thigh that morning. A habit so ingrained she'd done it automatically, even on what was supposed to be the safest day of her life. The gasps from the congregation were audible as she checked the weapon with practiced efficiency, her movements so fluid they seemed choreographed. Michael stared at her in shock, finally understanding that every assumption he'd made about the woman he loved was built on carefully constructed lies. "Kate," he said quietly, "who are you? Really?" She looked at him one last time, her pale blue eyes holding depths he'd never suspected. Someone who's very good at stopping bad people from hurting innocent ones. And right now, that's all that matters. The federal agents flanked her as she walked down the aisle she'd entered as a bride just minutes earlier. But now, with her weapon drawn and her training reasserting itself with terrifying ease, she moved like the predator she'd been trained to be. The wedding guests parted before her like water, instinctively recognizing that they were witnessing the emergence of something dangerous and necessary. As they reached the chapel doors, Kate turned back once. The scene looked like a painting. Her abandoned groom at the altar, her mother standing proud despite her tears, friends and family frozen in bewildered tableau under the golden light of stained glass windows. "I love you," she called to Michael, her voice carrying clearly across the sacred space. "Remember that, no matter what you hear about what happens next." Then she was through the doors and into the harsh sunlight, where a black SUV waited with its engine running.
In the distance, she could already hear the rhythmic thump of helicopter rotors growing closer. The bride was gone, the operative had returned.
The black SUV tore through the winding mountain roads of Cedar Falls at speeds that would have made Kate's driving instructor weep, but she barely noticed the G-forces pressing her against the leather seats. Her mind had already shifted into operational mode, compartmentalizing the emotional wreckage of her destroyed wedding into a locked box she'd deal with later, if there was a later. Right now, her focus was entirely on the tactical briefing the female agent was delivering through a secure tablet. Target's name is Viktor Alexandrovich Zaitsev, age 47, former Spetsnaz, discharged in 1999 after an incident involving civilian casualties in Chechnya, Agent Morris read from the classified file. Since then, he's operated as a freelance arms dealer specializing in exotic weapons and hard-to-acquire materials. The man's a ghost, no permanent address, no known associates who've stayed alive long enough to testify, and a talent for disappearing that borders on supernatural. Kate studied the surveillance photos on the screen, noting how Zaitsev had aged since their last encounter. His dark hair had gone silver at the temples, deep lines had etched themselves around his pale blue eyes, but the cold intelligence that had made him so dangerous remained unchanged. She'd tracked him across 3 continents, learned his patterns, his preferences, even his choice of cigarettes. Turkish blend, always lit with an antique silver lighter engraved with Cyrillic script. "What's his connection to this area?" Kate asked, her fingers already working to modify her wedding dress for tactical purposes. The agents had provided her with basic field gear, tactical vest, communications equipment, weapons, but she couldn't exactly strip down to change in the backseat of a moving vehicle. Instead, she was adapting what she had with the resourcefulness that had kept her alive through dozens of covert operations. "Inside job?" she asked, securing her tactical vest over the wedding dress bodice. The contrast was surreal. White satin and French lace, paired with military-grade body armor and weapon systems. "That's what Admiral Stone suspects," the male agent replied from the driver's seat, his knuckles white as he took another sharp turn. The convoy's route was classified at the highest levels. Only a handful of people knew the exact timing and location. If Zaitsev had that information, someone with serious clearance gave it to him. Kate's blood ran cold. A compromised federal operation meant they couldn't trust normal intelligence channels or backup protocols. It meant they were walking into a situation where allies might be enemies, where standard operating procedures could be traps, and where the only person she could truly rely on was herself. Exactly the kind of scenario that got her unit disbanded in the first place. Her phone buzzed, not the encrypted military device, but her personal phone. A text from Michael. "Whatever you're doing, be safe. I love you." She stared at the message for a long moment, then powered the phone down completely. Personal connections were vulnerabilities in the field, emotional anchors that could get people killed. She'd learned that lesson the hard way in Sarajevo when thinking about her mother's birthday cost her precious seconds during an extraction that ended with 2 friendly casualties. "NTA to target area?" she asked, forcing herself to focus on the mission parameters. 12 minutes to the forward operating base, then insertion by helicopter to Zaitsev's last known position. Admiral Stone will brief you personally on the specific tactical requirements. Kate nodded, then began the mental preparation ritual that had served her through years of high-stakes operations. She closed her eyes and visualized the mission space: mountainous terrain, limited visibility, multiple potential escape routes for the target. She ran through weapon configurations, ammunition loads, communication protocols, and extraction procedures until they became as automatic as breathing. The SUV crested a ridge, and Kate opened her eyes to see a temporary command center sprawled across an alpine meadow, military vehicles, communication arrays, and the distinctive silhouette of a Black Hawk helicopter with rotors already turning. Personnel and tactical gear moved with the purposeful efficiency of a well-coordinated operation, but Kate's trained eye caught the tension in their movements, the way they kept checking their weapons and scanning the perimeter. They were scared, and that fear was infectious. Admiral Rebecca Stone stood near the command trailer, her silver hair pulled back in a regulation bun, her blue eyes as sharp as Kate remembered from their last meeting 3 years ago. Stone had been the one to authorize Kate's early retirement, understanding that some operatives reached a point where continued service would destroy them as surely as enemy action. Seeing her here meant the situation was even worse than the initial briefing suggested. The SUV slammed to a stop, and Kate was out the door before the engine finished turning, her modified wedding dress billowing around her combat boots as she strode toward her former commanding officer. The contrast between her appearance and the military precision of her movement drew stares from the assembled personnel, but Kate had long since stopped caring what people thought about her unconventional approaches to warfare. "Admiral," she said, offering a crisp salute that felt both natural and foreign after 3 years of civilian life. Stone returned the salute with a slight smile. "Kate, I'd say it's good to see you, but considering the circumstances..." She gestured toward the command trailer. "We need to talk. Privately." Inside the trailer, maps covered every available surface, marked with red pins indicating Zaitsev's suspected positions and black pins showing federal casualties. A large monitor displayed real-time satellite imagery of the surrounding mountains, but Kate noticed significant gaps in coverage, dead zones where electronic surveillance simply couldn't penetrate. "Tell me you have a plan that doesn't involve me going in blind," Kate said, studying the tactical displays with growing concern. Stone's expression was grim. "That's exactly what I'm afraid we're asking you to do. Zaitsev has been jamming our communications and surveillance for the past 4 hours. We've lost contact with 3 reconnaissance teams, and our last drone was shot down 20 minutes ago. What I can tell you is that he's holed up somewhere in this 10-square-mile area, he has the plutonium, and our technical analysts believe he's less than 6 hours away from having a functional radiological dispersal device." Kate felt the familiar weight of impossible odds settling on her shoulders. "Support? You'll have a 2-person backup team for Overwatch, but they'll have to maintain distance to avoid detection. Primary mission objective is elimination of the target and recovery of the fissile material. Secondary objective is intelligence gathering. We need to know how he got the convoy information and whether there are other operations in play. Rules of engagement?" Stone's eyes hardened. "Whatever it takes, Kate. Zaitsev cannot leave that mountain alive, and that plutonium cannot fall into anyone else's hands. You have full authorization for any necessary actions up to and including leveling the entire facility if required." Kate nodded, understanding the weight of what she was being asked to do. This wasn't just a mission, it was a suicide run disguised as a tactical operation. They were sending her in alone against a target who'd been planning this operation for months, in terrain he'd chosen specifically for its defensive advantages, with backups she couldn't rely on and intelligence she couldn't trust. She looked down at her modified wedding dress, now accessorized with enough firepower to level a city block. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd spent the morning getting ready to promise herself to one man for life, and now she was preparing to kill another man to save thousands of lives she'd never meet. "One more thing," Stone added quietly. "We intercepted a communication from Zaitsev's position about an hour ago. He knows you're coming, Kate. He's been waiting for you specifically. This whole operation, the convoy hit, the plutonium theft, even choosing this location, it's all been designed to draw you out of retirement." Kate felt ice water flow through her veins. "He's using the dirty bomb as bait." "That's our assessment. The question is, why does Viktor Zaitsev want you badly enough to risk everything to get your attention?" Kate checked her weapons one final time, her mind already racing through tactical possibilities and psychological profiles. She'd hunted Zaitsev for 18 months, but apparently he'd been hunting her for even longer. "I guess I'm about to find out," she said, heading toward the helicopter that would take her into the mountains where her wedding day would either end in triumph or tragedy. The Black Hawk's rotors thundered overhead as Kate checked her equipment one final time, the downdraft whipping her shortened wedding dress around her tactical gear in a surreal dance of silk and steel. The helicopter crew, 2 pilots and a gunner, had tried to hide their surprise when she'd climbed aboard in her modified bridal attire, but professionalism had quickly overtaken curiosity. In their world, operational effectiveness mattered more than conventional appearance, and Kate's reputation preceded her into any aircraft carrying federal operators. Preparing and narrating the story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Through her headset, she received the final intelligence update from Admiral Stone's voice, crackling with static as they gained altitude. Satellite thermal imaging shows significant heat signatures in the old Copper Creek mining facility, approximately 8 miles northeast of your insertion point. We're reading at least 12 individuals, heavy equipment, and what appears to be a mobile laboratory setup. Be advised, Kate,
Zaitsev has had 6 hours to prepare for your arrival. Expect countermeasures. Kate acknowledged the transmission with 2 clicks of her radio, then turned her attention to the terrain scrolling beneath them. The Wyoming mountains stretched endlessly in all directions, their peaks shrouded in late afternoon clouds that would provide both concealment and tactical challenges. Dense pine forests covered the lower elevations, giving way to rocky outcroppings and alpine meadows higher up. It was beautiful country, the kind of wilderness that had drawn her to Cedar Falls in the first place. But now, every ridge and valley represented potential ambush points and escape routes. Her backup team consisted of 2 federal agents she'd never worked with before, Martinez and Thompson, both young, both eager, both carrying the kind of nervous energy that could get people killed in close-quarters combat. They'd been briefed on her operational history, but reading classified files was different from understanding how someone moved in the field, how they thought under pressure, how they made split-second decisions that meant the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. "Ma'am," Agent Martinez spoke through the comm system, his voice tight with concentration. "What's our ROE if we encounter civilians in the target area?" It was a good question, one that highlighted the moral complexity of their situation. Mining facilities in this region often attracted homeless veterans, survivalist groups, or young people seeking remote party locations. If Zaitsev had chosen the site specifically to complicate any federal response, innocent bystanders could become human shields or unwitting casualties. "Protect civilian lives at all costs," Kate replied, her voice steady despite the helicopter's vibration. "But remember, anyone still in that facility after 6 hours of federal activity in the area is either Zaitsev's people or already compromised. Trust your training, but verify every target before engaging." The pilot's voice cut through their conversation. 2 minutes to insertion point. Weather's deteriorating, visibility dropping fast. This might be our only window for clean extraction. Through the aircraft's windows, Kate could see storm clouds building over the higher peaks, their dark mass promising the kind of weather that grounded aircraft and cut communication links. If they got trapped on the mountain overnight, they'd be fighting Zaitsev on his terms in conditions he'd spent weeks preparing for. The tactical disadvantage would be nearly insurmountable. Kate ran through her equipment checklist one final time. Suppressed M4 carbine with thermal optic, secondary weapon secured at her hip, tactical knife, breaching charges, communications gear, and medical supplies. The wedding dress, now modified with reinforced knee and elbow protection, had been treated with stain-resistant coating that would help break up her silhouette against varied terrain. It wasn't standard-issue camouflage, but it would have to do. "Remember," she told Martinez and Thompson as the helicopter began its descent toward a rocky clearing barely large enough for landing, "Zaitsev is former Spetsnaz. He's been planning this operation for months, and he specifically wanted to draw me into his kill zone. That means everything we encounter, every piece of intel, every tactical advantage, every apparent mistake on his part, should be considered potential bait for a larger trap." The aircraft touched down with mechanical precision, rotors never stopping, as Kate and her team fast-roped to the ground. The moment her boots hit rocky soil, she felt the familiar rush of operational awareness flooding through her nervous system. Every sight, sound, and scent registered at heightened intensity. The pine needle fragrance carried on thin mountain air, the distant sound of running water that meant a stream they could use for navigation, and the complete absence of bird calls that suggested predator presence in the area. The mining facility lay 8 miles to the northeast, accessible through a series of game trails and abandoned logging roads that would provide concealment but limit their movement speed. Kate estimated 3 hours of hard hiking through increasingly difficult terrain, assuming no contact with hostile forces. If Zaitsev had deployed perimeter security, and his operational profile suggested he absolutely had, they could expect first contact within the next 90 minutes. "Comms check?" Kate whispered into her throat microphone as they began their approach march through dense pine forest. Both agents responded with clear signals, but she noticed Martinez breathing slightly harder than optimal for the current exertion level. Altitude adjustment, nervous tension, or inadequate physical conditioning.
Any of those factors could compromise their mission effectiveness when split-second reactions became necessary. The forest closed around them like a living entity, towering pines creating a canopy so thick that afternoon sunlight barely penetrated to the forest floor. Kate moved with the fluid silence of someone who'd spent years perfecting the art of invisible approach, each footstep placed with deliberate precision to avoid snapping twigs or disturbing loose stones. Behind her, Martinez and Thompson did their best to match her pace, but she could hear the subtle sounds that mark them as federal agents rather than special operations veterans. The whisper of tactical gear against fabric, the barely audible click of metal on metal, and the controlled breathing that was just slightly too conscious to be natural. 2 miles into their approach, Kate held up a closed fist, bringing the team to an immediate halt. Something had changed in the forest's rhythm, a subtle shift in air pressure, a barely perceptible alteration in the ambient sound that suggested human presence ahead. She closed her eyes and listened with the total concentration that had kept her alive through dozens of similar situations. There, the soft scrape of boot leather against stone, approximately 200 meters ahead and slightly uphill from their position. A single sentry, probably equipped with radio communications and positioned to provide early warning of federal approach. Standard Spetsnaz doctrine called for layered perimeter security with overlapping fields of observation, which meant this was just the first of several detection points they'd need to neutralize. Kate signaled for Thompson to maintain overwatch while she and Martinez moved to flank the sentry position. The forest floor was treacherous, covered with decades of fallen pine needles that could shift underfoot and create noise, but Kate had learned to read terrain like a language during her years of covert operations. She selected each movement with the patience of someone who understood that hurried action in tactical environments usually resulted in dead operators. The sentry was exactly where her training had predicted, positioned behind a fallen log with clear sight lines down the game trail they'd been following, radio equipment visible, weapon ready but not immediately threatening. He was young, probably early 20s, with the lean build and alert posture of someone accustomed to dangerous work. Not Zaitsev himself, but definitely professional rather than hired muscle. Kate had 2 choices, elimination or neutralization. Killing the sentry would prevent him from raising an alarm, but a missed radio check would accomplish the same result. Capturing him might provide intelligence about Zaitsev's defensive preparations, but it would also complicate their approach and potentially compromise their position if he managed to escape or signal for help. She made her decision with a cold calculation that had defined our operational career. Some situations required mercy. This wasn't one of them. Too many lives hung in the balance, and the plutonium in Zaitsev's possession could kill thousands if their mission failed because of misplaced compassion. Moving with surgical precision, Kate eliminated the threat in complete silence, her actions efficient and professional. Martinez arrived 30 seconds later to find her already searching the body for intelligence materials and radio frequencies. The dead sentry carried standard mercenary equipment, nothing that would identify Zaitsev's operational base or reveal the scope of his defensive preparations. "How many more?" Martinez whispered, his voice steady despite what he'd just witnessed. Kate studied the terrain ahead through her optical sight, calculating angles and distances. At least 3 more perimeter positions, probably 6. And that's just what we can see from here. Zaitsev has had weeks to prepare this killing ground. She checked her watch. 16:47 hours. Sunset would arrive in approximately 90 minutes, providing concealment for their final approach, but also making target identification more difficult. If they were going to reach the mining facility before full darkness, they needed to move fast and eliminate threats efficiently. "Stay close," she told both agents as they resumed their advance through increasingly hostile terrain. "And remember, we're not just hunting Viktor Zaitsev anymore. He's hunting us too."
The abandoned Copper Creek mining facility emerged from the mountain mist like a monument to industrial decay, its rusted infrastructure and collapsed buildings scattered across a barren plateau that had once buzzed with the activity of men seeking fortune in the Earth's depths. Kate observed the complex through her thermal scope from a concealed position 800 meters downslope, cataloging defensive positions and identifying patterns of movement that would reveal Zaitsev's tactical deployment.
The facility was larger than the satellite imagery had suggested, a maze of interconnected buildings, processing equipment, and underground tunnels that created countless opportunities for ambush and concealment. Floodlights had been rigged throughout the complex, their harsh illumination creating stark contrasts between light and shadow that would make approaching undetected extremely difficult. Kate counted at least 15 heat signatures moving through the buildings with the disciplined patterns of trained security personnel rather than the random wandering of casual occupants. Jesus, Thompson whispered through the comm system, his voice tight with apprehension as he surveyed the target area through his own optics. It's like a fortress up there. Kate silenced him with a sharp hand gesture, then continued her methodical assessment of Zaitsev's defensive preparations. The arms dealer had chosen his position with the tactical acumen she remembered from their previous encounters. High ground, multiple escape routes, clear fields of fire in all directions, and natural barriers that would channel any assault into predetermined kill zones. More concerning was the sophisticated electronic countermeasures equipment she could identify among the heat signatures, gear that would jam their communications and blind any aerial support. Martinez adjusted his position beside her, careful not to disturb the loose shale that could create noise and reveal their observation post. How do we approach without getting cut to pieces in the open ground? It was a valid question that highlighted the central challenge of their mission. The final 400 meters to the facility offered virtually no concealment, just rocky terrain and scattered debris that would provide minimal cover against determined defenders with elevated firing positions. Kate had faced similar tactical problems before, but never while wearing a modified wedding dress and operating with unfamiliar backup who might crack under pressure. Through her scope, she identified what appeared to be the facility's main operational center, a large building near the complex's heart where heat signatures clustered around what looked like technical equipment. If Zaitsev was assembling his radiological dispersal device, that would be the most logical location for the work. It was also the most heavily defended position in the entire complex, surrounded by multiple security layers and positioned to maximize the defensive advantage of his mercenary force. Kate's tactical computer, a ruggedized tablet integrated into her equipment loadout, displayed a three-dimensional model of the facility based on archived mining surveys and current thermal imagery. She traced potential approach routes with her finger, calculating angles of attack, timing requirements, and probability matrices for mission success. Every scenario ended with unacceptable casualty projections, unless they could find a way to neutralize Zaitsev's numerical advantage. There, she said quietly, pointing to a section of the facility where the thermal imaging showed unusual patterns. Those buildings are connected to the old mining tunnel system. If we can access the underground network, we might be able to approach from below. Thompson studied the tablet display with growing excitement. Bypasses their perimeter security entirely. But how do we know the tunnels are still passable after all these years? We don't, Kate replied with characteristic directness, but it's our best option for getting close enough to matter. The alternative is a frontal assault across open ground against superior numbers and prepared positions. That's not tactics, it's suicide. She continued analyzing the thermal patterns, noting how the heat signatures moved through the complex with military precision rather than the casual patterns of civilian contractors. Zaitsev hadn't just hired muscle for this operation, he'd assembled a professional military unit with the training and equipment to hold their position against federal assault. The implications were troubling, suggesting resources and connections far beyond what intelligence had credited to a freelance arms dealer. A new heat signature appeared on the thermal display, moving differently from the others. Slower, more deliberate, pausing frequently as if conducting inspections or giving orders. Kate adjusted her scope's magnification and felt her blood run cold. Even through the distortion of thermal imaging, she recognized the posture and movement patterns of Viktor Zaitsev himself. He was touring his defenses, personally ensuring that every position was properly manned and equipped.
Target acquired, she whispered into her throat microphone. Zaitsev is on site, personally supervising defensive preparations. This confirms intelligence assessment. He's not planning to run. He intends to make his stand here. The realization added another layer of complexity to their tactical situation. If Zaitsev was committed to defending this position rather than escaping with his prize, it meant he either believed his defenses were impregnable or he was operating under a timeline that didn't allow for relocation. Either scenario suggested they were walking into the kind of prepared killing ground that had earned Spetsnaz units their fearsome reputation during the Soviet era. Kate began planning their infiltration route through the mining tunnels, cross-referencing archived survey data with current topographical information to identify the most likely access points. The tunnel system was extensive, originally designed to move ore and equipment through the mountain's interior, but decades of abandonment had left their structural integrity uncertain. Cave-ins, flooding, or toxic gas accumulation could turn their infiltration route into a tomb. "Movement on the perimeter," Martinez reported, his voice professionally calm despite the tension. "Two-man patrol team, approximately 600 meters north of our position, moving in a search pattern." Kate swung her scope toward the indicated direction and confirmed the sighting. Two armed figures were methodically sweeping the approaches to the facility, their movement coordinated and professional. They weren't just looking for intruders, they were hunting with the patience and skill of experienced operators who understood that federal response would likely include reconnaissance elements exactly like Kate's team. "They're expanding their security perimeter," she observed, watching the patrol's systematic approach. "Zaitsev knows we're here. Maybe not our exact position, but he's aware that federal assets are closing in." The tactical situation was deteriorating rapidly. Discovery by the patrol would force them into immediate combat, compromising their stealth advantage and alerting the entire complex to their presence. But allowing the patrol to continue expanding their search pattern would eventually expose their observation post and eliminate any chance of surprise attack. Kate made her decision with the cold calculation that had defined her operational career. "Thompson, you have Overwatch. Martinez, we're going to intercept that patrol before they can report our position. Silent elimination only. No gunfire, no radio chatter, no evidence that might alert the main force." Moving with the fluid precision of someone who'd performed similar operations dozens of times, Kate led Martinez through a flanking maneuver designed to intercept the patrol at a natural choke point between two large boulder formations. The terrain favored their approach, providing concealment while channeling the targets into a predictable path where close-quarters engagement would be possible. Her modified wedding dress, now thoroughly stained with pine sap and mountain soil, rustled softly as she positioned herself behind the larger boulder. The tactical absurdity of her situation, hunting armed mercenaries while wearing bridal attire, might have been amusing under different circumstances, but Kate had learned long ago to compartmentalize such distractions during operational phases. The first mercenary appeared exactly where her tactical analysis had predicted, his weapon ready but not immediately threatening as he scanned for signs of federal presence. Kate could see the professional competence in his movement, the way he cleared angles and maintained situational awareness while advancing. This wasn't hired muscle or desperate criminal, this was trained military conducting reconnaissance with disciplined precision. She waited until both targets were committed to their approach path, then struck with the surgical efficiency that had made her reputation in special operations. The engagement lasted less than 30 seconds and ended with 2 more casualties for Zaitsev's force. But Kate took no satisfaction in the outcome. Every person she eliminated was someone who wouldn't be threatening innocent civilians. But there were also evidence that this situation was escalating beyond the parameters of a simple extraction mission. "Patrol neutralized," she reported to Thompson through hand signals, maintaining radio silence to prevent electronic detection. "But they'll be missed when they fail to report in. We need to move fast." The window for stealth infiltration was closing rapidly. Soon Zaitsev would realize his perimeter team had been compromised and shift to active defense protocols that would make their mission exponentially more difficult. Kate studied the facility one final time through her thermal scope, memorizing defensive positions and identifying the most likely route through the mining tunnels. "Time to go underground," she told Martinez as they prepared to leave their observation post, "and pray those mining tunnels are more stable than Zaitsev's psychological profile." The hunt was no longer just beginning. It had entered its most dangerous phase, where every decision could mean the difference between stopping a radiological attack and becoming another casualty in Viktor Zaitsev's carefully planned revenge.
The entrance to the abandoned mining tunnel system was little more than a crack in the mountainside, concealed behind decades of overgrowth and rockfall that had hidden it from casual observation. Kate squeezed through the narrow opening first, her modified wedding dress catching on jagged stone as she descended into the suffocating darkness of the mountain's interior. The air inside was thick with the musty scent of decades-old decay. And something else. The metallic tang of recent human activity that made her tactical instincts scream warnings. Martinez followed close behind, his breathing slightly labored from the altitude and tension, while Compson remained at the surface to maintain overwatch and communication with their distant helicopter support. The tactical light mounted to Kate's weapon carved a narrow cone of visibility through the absolute darkness, revealing tunnel walls that wept moisture and floor surfaces littered with the debris of industrial abandonment. "Stay close and watch for structural instability," Kate whispered, her voice barely audible in the confined space. These tunnels were carved in the 1940s with equipment and safety standards that wouldn't pass modern inspection. Cave-ins are a constant threat, especially with the recent seismic activity in this region. The tunnel descended at a steep angle, following the natural geology of the mountain as it had been shaped by decades of mining operations. Kate's tactical computer displayed their approximate position relative to the facility above, but GPS signals couldn't penetrate the mountain's mass, leaving them dependent on dead reckoning navigation and the archived mining surveys she downloaded before insertion. 20 meters into their underground advance, Kate held up a closed fist, bringing Martinez to an immediate halt. Her enhanced hearing, trained through years of covert operations, had detected something that didn't belong in an abandoned tunnel system: the subtle sound of electrical equipment humming in the distance. Someone had been using these passages recently, and they'd brought modern technology with them. "Movement sensors or communication relays," she breathed into Martinez's ear, her lips almost touching his skin to prevent sound from carrying in the confined space. "Zaitsev's people have been down here. This isn't as abandoned as intelligence suggested." They continued their descent with heightened caution, every footstep placed with deliberate precision to avoid loose stones or creaking floorboards that might trigger detection systems. Kate's tactical light revealed evidence of recent passage: boot prints in the accumulated dust, freshly disturbed cobwebs, and the kind of wear patterns that suggested regular traffic rather than occasional exploration. The tunnel branched repeatedly, creating a maze of interconnected passages that could easily become a death trap if they lost their way or encountered hostile forces with superior knowledge of the layout. Kate relied on her compass bearing and distance calculations to maintain their general direction toward the facility's central complex. But she was acutely aware that one wrong turn could leave them lost in a labyrinth of abandoned mining shafts. "Heat signature ahead," Martinez whispered, pointing towards a junction where their tunnel intersected with a larger passage. Through the darkness, Kate could see the faint glow of artificial lighting and the unmistakable warmth patterns that indicated human presence. Someone was stationed at the intersection, probably as a security checkpoint for anyone attempting exactly what they were doing. Kate studied the tactical situation through her thermal scope, identifying a single guard positioned to monitor multiple tunnel approaches. The sentry appeared relaxed but alert, suggesting routine security duty rather than active combat readiness. More importantly, he was equipped with radio communications that would allow him to alert the surface facility if he detected intruders in the tunnel system. She signaled Martinez to maintain position while she moved forward to neutralize the threat. The tunnel floor was treacherous, covered with decades of accumulated debris and moisture that made silent movement extremely challenging. Kate had to test each footstep before committing her full weight, advancing with the patience of someone who understood that haste in tactical environments usually resulted in casualties. The guard was positioned exactly where her training had predicted. in a natural choke point where he could observe multiple approaches while maintaining communication with his superiors. He was young, probably early 20s, with the lean build and alert posture of someone accustomed to dangerous work, but not expecting immediate threat. Kate could see the radio headset around his neck and the weapon resting across his lap as he conducted what appeared to be routine surveillance duty.
Kate's approach required absolute precision. The confined space of the tunnel meant that any struggle would create noise that could alert other security elements, and the guard's radio equipment meant that a missed communication check would trigger facility-wide alerts. She had to eliminate the threat completely and silently, then determine whether his absence would be noticed before they could complete their mission. Moving with surgical precision, Kate neutralized the sentry in complete silence, her actions efficient and professional. The engagement lasted less than 10 seconds and ended with another casualty for Zaitsev's force, but Kate took no satisfaction in the outcome. Every person she eliminated was evidence that this situation was escalating beyond the parameters of a simple extraction mission. Martinez arrived to find her already searching the guard's equipment for intelligence materials and communication protocols. The dead sentry carried standard mercenary gear, radio equipment, basic weapons, and a laminated map of the tunnel system that revealed far more about Zaitsev's preparations than Kate had expected. The arms dealer hadn't just chosen this facility for its defensive advantages. He'd spent weeks mapping and preparing the entire underground network as part of his operational plan. "Look at this," Kate whispered, showing Martinez the tunnel map. Red marks indicated security checkpoints, blue lines showed primary movement routes, and green squares marked what appeared to be supply caches positioned throughout the system. Zaitsev had turned the abandoned mining complex into a three-dimensional fortress with multiple layers of defense both above and below ground. More concerning were the technical notations on the map that suggested sophisticated electronic countermeasures throughout the tunnel system. Motion detectors, communication relays, and what appeared to be remotely detonated charges positioned at strategic choke points. If Zaitsev decided to collapse the tunnels, anyone underground would be trapped or killed instantly. "We're not just infiltrating," Martinez observed quietly, studying the defensive preparations revealed by the captured map. "We're walking into a prepared kill zone designed specifically for federal operators attempting exactly what we're doing." Kate nodded grimly, understanding the full implications of their tactical situation. Zaitsev hadn't just anticipated a federal response. He'd planned for it, prepared for it, and created multiple layers of defense designed to channel any assault into predetermined engagement areas where his forces would have overwhelming advantage. They weren't hunting him. They were being hunted by someone who'd spent months preparing for this exact confrontation. The tunnel ahead stretched into darkness that seemed to swallow their tactical lights, but Kate could see the faint glow of artificial illumination in the distance that marked their objective. Somewhere in that maze of abandoned mining passages, Viktor Zaitsev was assembling a radiological dispersal device that could kill thousands of people. And between Kate and that objective lay an unknown number of armed mercenaries, electronic detection systems, and booby traps designed by someone who knew exactly how federal operators would approach this mission. "Time check," Kate whispered, consulting the luminous dial of her tactical watch. They've been underground for 37 minutes, and her operational timeline allowed for a maximum of 2 hours before extraction became impossible due to deteriorating weather conditions. If they were going to reach Zaitsev and neutralize the radiological threat, they needed to move faster despite the increasing dangers. "Stay sharp," she told Martinez, as they resumed their advance through the tunnel system. "From here on, assume everything is a trap until proven otherwise. Zaitsev has had too much time to prepare, and he knows we're coming." Behind them, the dead guard's radio crackled with static as someone attempted to establish communication. When no response came, they knew they had minutes before Zaitsev's security forces realized their perimeter had been breached. The stealth phase of their operation was ending, and the direct confrontation she had been dreading was about to begin. In the distance, artificial lights grew brighter and the sound of machinery became more distinct. They were approaching the heart of Zaitsev's operation, where weapons-grade plutonium was being shaped into humanity's nightmare. Kate checked her weapons one final time and prepared to face the man who'd spent years planning her destruction. The tunnels ahead would lead either to mission success or to their deaths, and Kate was no longer certain which outcome Zaitsev preferred.
The central chamber of the mining facility opened before them like a cathedral of industrial decay, its vaulted ceiling disappearing into shadows that their tactical lights couldn't penetrate. Kate and Martinez emerged from the tunnel system into a space that had been transformed from abandoned mining equipment into a sophisticated laboratory and weapons assembly area. Harsh fluorescent lighting revealed workbenches lined with technical equipment, computer monitors displaying incomprehensible data streams, and in the center of it all, a metallic cylinder that could only be the radiological dispersal device Zaitsev had been constructing. Kate's blood ran cold as she assessed the scope of the operation. This wasn't the crude dirty bomb she'd expected. It was a professionally engineered weapon system with the kind of technical sophistication that suggested military-grade expertise and unlimited funding. The plutonium from the hijacked federal convoy had been shaped into components that would maximize radioactive dispersal while maintaining the stability necessary for transportation and deployment. Someone with advanced nuclear engineering knowledge had designed this device, and that someone wasn't Viktor Zaitsev. "Jesus Christ!" Martinez whispered, his voice tight with horror as he comprehended what they were looking at. "That thing could contaminate half the state!" Kate silenced him with a sharp gesture, her enhanced hearing detecting movement in the chamber's upper levels, where catwalks and observation platforms provided elevated positions for security personnel. Through her thermal scope, she counted at least 8 heat signatures positioned around the chamber's perimeter, their weapons trained on the tunnel entrances in anticipation of exactly the kind of federal infiltration they'd just accomplished. More concerning was the figure standing beside the completed radiological device. Tall, lean, silver-haired, wearing the kind of expensive tactical gear that suggested unlimited resources rather than mercenary pragmatism. Viktor Zaitsev had aged since their last encounter, but his pale blue eyes retained the cold intelligence that had made him one of the most dangerous arms dealers in the world. He stood with the relaxed confidence of someone who'd spent months preparing for this moment and was certain of the outcome. "Katarina Thorne," Zaitsev called out, his accent still carrying traces of his Russian military background despite decades of international operations. Or should I say Mrs. Brennan, though I suppose that ceremony never reached completion, did it? The taunt confirmed Kate's worst fears. Zaitsev knew everything about her carefully constructed civilian life, including details about her wedding that should have been impossible for him to obtain. Someone with access to federal surveillance systems had been feeding him intelligence, probably for months, allowing him to plan this operation with complete knowledge of how she would respond. Kate stepped into the open, her weapon ready but not immediately threatening, calculating angles and distances while maintaining the appearance of negotiation. "Viktor, it's been a long time. Budapest seems like a lifetime ago." "Indeed it does," Zaitsev replied with a slight smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You were so close that night. Another few minutes and you might have prevented so much subsequent unpleasantness. American soldiers in Afghanistan, civilians in Syria, that unfortunate incident in Berlin. All of those deaths could have been avoided if you'd been just a little faster, just a little more decisive." The psychological warfare was textbook Spetsnaz doctrine. Identify the target's emotional vulnerabilities and exploit them to create hesitation or tactical errors. Kate had expected exactly this approach, but hearing the specific details of operations that had haunted her dreams for 3 years still struck deeper than professional detachment should have allowed. "Enough games, Viktor," Kate said, her voice steady despite the emotional assault. "You have something that belongs to the United States government. Hand over the plutonium and surrender, and maybe you'll live to see a federal prison instead of a body bag." Zaitsev laughed, the sound echoing through the chamber with genuine amusement. "My dear Katarina, you still don't understand the situation, do you? This entire operation, the convoy robbery, the facility preparation, even the timing that interrupted your wedding, it was all designed to bring you here, to this moment, for a very specific purpose." He gestured toward the radiological device with obvious pride.
This beautiful creation isn't intended for deployment against American cities or strategic targets. It's a demonstration model, a proof of concept for prospective buyers who need to see the quality of my work before committing to larger purchases. And you, my accomplished operative, are going to help me provide that demonstration.
Kate felt ice water flow through her veins as she understood the full scope of Zaitsev's plan. He wasn't planning a terrorist attack. He was conducting a live-fire marketing presentation for potential clients who wanted to purchase similar weapons, and her forced participation in stopping him would serve as proof that his devices were sophisticated enough to require the attention of America's most elite operators. The buyers are watching through encrypted video feeds, Zaitsev continued, confirming her worst fears. Military contractors, intelligence services, terrorist organizations, anyone with sufficient funding and appropriate ambition. They've all been told that the legendary Ghost 7, the operative who single-handedly eliminated the Sarajevo cell and extracted the Kabul asset under impossible odds, would be attempting to stop this demonstration. Martinez shifted beside her, probably calculating his own tactical options. But Kate knew they were trapped in a carefully orchestrated scenario that had been planned for months. Every entrance to the chamber was covered by armed mercenaries. The radiological device was probably rigged with anti-tampering explosives, and their extraction team had no knowledge of their precise location within the facility. "Your reputation precedes you, Katarina," Zaitsev said, beginning to pace around the device like a lecturer delivering a prepared presentation. The buyers need to see that their investment can withstand the attention of America's best special operations personnel. If you can't stop this demonstration, then ordinary law enforcement and military units will be completely helpless against similar devices. Kate realized with growing horror that she was being forced to participate in her own destruction. Success in neutralizing the radiological threat would serve as a marketing tool for Zaitsev's future sales, while failure would result in radioactive contamination that could kill thousands of innocent people. It was a perfect psychological trap designed to exploit the very training and moral code that had made her an effective operator. "But you're forgetting something important, Victor," Kate said, her mind racing through tactical alternatives while maintaining the appearance of calm negotiation. "I'm not the same person you remember from Budapest. I've had 3 years to think about our previous encounters, 3 years to analyze your operational patterns, and 3 years to plan what I'd do if we ever met again." Zaitsev's confident smile faltered slightly, the first crack in his psychological armor that Kate had managed to create. "And what conclusion did you reach during those 3 years of civilian domesticity?" Kate smiled with genuine warmth for the first time since entering the chamber. "That you always make the same mistake, Victor. You assume everyone else thinks like you do, coldly, logically, without emotional attachments that can be exploited. You've spent months planning this demonstration based on psychological profiles and operational history, but you never considered what happens when someone stops fighting for their country or their unit and starts fighting for the people they love." She thought of Michael standing at the altar, of her mother's tears, of the wedding guests who'd become her chosen family over 3 years of carefully constructed normalcy. None of them deserved to become casualties in Viktor Zaitsev's elaborate revenge scheme. "The difference between us is that you're still fighting the last war, while I'm fighting for the next peace." Before Zaitsev could respond, Kate initiated the action that would determine whether her wedding day ended in triumph or tragedy. The chamber erupted into chaos as Kate executed the plan she'd been formulating since the moment she realized they were trapped. It wasn't about tactical superiority or superior firepower. It was about understanding that some fights couldn't be won through conventional means. The final confrontation between Ghost 7 and the arms dealer who'd haunted her dreams was about to begin, and only one of them would see the Wyoming sunset.
Kate's first move wasn't toward Zaitsev or the radiological device, it was toward the chamber's lighting system. Her tactical analysis had identified the power junction box during their initial reconnaissance, and she knew that darkness would neutralize the elevated firing positions while giving her the advantage of night vision equipment that most of Zaitsev's mercenaries wouldn't possess. The modified wedding dress that had seemed like such a liability suddenly became an asset, its white fabric helping to confuse targeting systems designed to track standard military uniforms. The chamber plunged into absolute darkness as Kate's breaching charge destroyed the main power coupling, but she was already moving before the lights failed. Her enhanced night vision revealed the positions of 8 mercenaries scrambling to adapt to sudden blindness, their muzzle flashes creating stark strobes of illumination that destroyed their own night adaptation while revealing their locations to someone trained in low-light combat operations. Martinez followed her lead with impressive competence, engaging targets on the chamber's eastern side, while Kate swept toward Zaitsev's position near the radiological device. The arms dealer had anticipated many scenarios, but fighting in complete darkness against an operator wearing a wedding dress apparently hadn't been among his contingency plans. His professional composure cracked as he fumbled for night vision equipment that should have been immediately accessible. "You always were too dependent on technological advantages," Kate called out, her voice seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere as she used the chamber's acoustics to mask her position. "Some of us learned to kill in the dark before we ever touched a computer." Zaitsev's response was a burst of automatic weapons fire that revealed his position while accomplishing nothing except wasting ammunition. Kate had already moved, circling toward the radiological device with the patient precision of someone who understood that haste in tactical environments usually resulted in casualties. Around them, the firefight continued as Martinez systematically eliminated the mercenary security team with efficiency that suggested better training than his federal background had indicated. The radiological device loomed before Kate in the darkness, its metallic surface gleaming dully in the residual light from emergency power systems. Her tactical computer provided detailed specifications for disarming the weapon, but she could see that Zaitsev had anticipated this approach as well. Anti-tampering devices were integrated throughout the assembly, designed to trigger detonation if anyone attempted unauthorized disassembly. It was a masterpiece of paranoid engineering, created by someone who understood that his enemies would be highly trained professionals with access to advanced technical support. "Katarina!" Zaitsev's voice carried across the chamber, still confident despite his technical disadvantage. "Even if you kill me, even if you somehow disable the device, you've already given my buyers everything they wanted. They've seen America's legendary Ghost 7 reduced to fighting in the dark, wearing a wedding dress, struggling against a handful of contractors in an abandoned mine. The demonstration has exceeded their expectations." Kate realized with growing fury that he was right. The encrypted video feeds were still broadcasting, probably through satellite uplinks that couldn't be easily disrupted. Potential buyers around the world were watching her desperate fight, analyzing her tactics, and drawing conclusions about the effectiveness of similar weapons against elite operators. Whether she succeeded or failed, Zaitsev had already accomplished his primary objective. But Kate had learned something during her 3 years of civilian life that her military training had never taught her. Sometimes, winning meant changing the rules of engagement entirely. Instead of attempting to disarm the radiological device through conventional means, she began implementing a plan that would turn Zaitsev's own paranoid preparations against him. "You're absolutely right, Victor," she called out, her voice seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere as she used the chamber's acoustics to mask her position. "Some of us learned to kill in the dark before we ever touched a computer." Zaitsev's response was a burst of automatic weapons fire that revealed his position, while accomplishing nothing except wasting ammunition. Kate had already moved, circling toward the radiological device with the patient precision of someone who understood that haste in tactical environments usually resulted in casualties. Around them, the firefight continued as Martinez systematically eliminated the mercenary security team with efficiency that suggested better training than his federal background had indicated.
Kate continued her careful approach toward the device, using Zaitsev's momentary relaxation to position herself for the action that would determine the mission's outcome. There's just one problem with your demonstration, Victor. You assumed the federal government sent a standard response team. What do you mean? Zaitsev demanded, wariness creeping back into his voice. I mean, Kate said, producing the thermal detonator she'd carried as part of her standard equipment loadout, that Ghost 7 was never officially reactivated for this mission. My presence here is completely off the books, which means there are no rules of engagement, no oversight protocols, and no limitations on acceptable collateral damage. Zaitsev's sharp intake of breath told her he understood the implications. If Kate's mission was unofficial, then her actions wouldn't be constrained by federal guidelines designed to minimize civilian casualties and preserve evidence for prosecution. She could solve the radiological threat through methods that would be unthinkable for sanctioned operations. You're bluffing, he said, but uncertainty had replaced confidence in his voice. You won't risk radioactive contamination that could affect thousands of innocent people. Kate smiled in the darkness, remembering Michael's face as he gave her permission to leave their wedding, her mother's understanding nod, the trust of friends and family who'd supported her decision to answer the call of duty one final time. You're right that I won't risk innocent lives, but I will risk mine and yours and everyone else in this facility to prevent something worse from happening to the people I love. The thermal detonator was designed to create temperatures exceeding 3,000 degrees Celsius in a controlled burst, hot enough to vaporize the plutonium components and render them harmless through complete atomic dispersal. The explosion would be contained within the mining chamber, but anyone present during detonation would be instantly killed. It was the kind of final solution that regular federal operations could never authorize, but that off-the-books missions sometimes required. Martinez, Kate called to her partner, who was finishing his systematic elimination of the remaining security team. Extraction Protocol 7, move to minimum safe distance and prepare for thermal event. She could hear Martinez's rapid movement toward the tunnel entrances, understanding that she was ordering him to abandon her while she implemented a solution that would save thousands of lives at the cost of her own. It was the kind of decision that separated special operations from regular military service, the willingness to make sacrifices that others couldn't even contemplate. Zaitsev realized with growing horror that she was serious about the thermal detonation. Wait, we can negotiate. The buyers will pay any price for exclusive access to the technology. You could retire with enough money to disappear forever. I already tried retirement, Kate replied, beginning the arming sequence on the thermal detonator. It was wonderful while it lasted, but some responsibilities can't be abandoned permanently. In the distance, she could hear the sound of helicopter rotors approaching the facility, probably Admiral Stone's extraction team responding to the loss of communication from the infiltration team. They would arrive too late to affect the mission's outcome, but they might be able to recover Martinez and document the successful neutralization of the radiological threat. Kate thought one final time about Michael waiting at the altar, about the wedding reception that would never happen, about the quiet life they'd planned together by the lake in Cedar Falls. It had been a beautiful dream, and she was grateful to have experienced 3 years of genuine peace before duty called her back to the shadows. "Tell my buyers," Zaitsev said desperately as Kate's thumb hovered over the detonator's activation switch. "Tell them that even America's best operators can be stopped if you plan carefully enough. I'll be sure to mention that in whatever afterlife we end up sharing," Kate replied with dark humor. The thermal detonator had reached final arming status, its display showing the familiar countdown that had appeared in her nightmares for 3 years. But this time, instead of failure and regret, Kate felt only the calm satisfaction of a mission about to be completed successfully. Viktor Zaitsev, long campaign of revenge, was about to end exactly as it should, with his own destruction. Kate's thumb froze on the detonator switch as a voice crackled through the facility's emergency communication system. Not Zaitsev's mercenaries, not federal backup, but Michael's voice, impossibly present in this underground chamber of death and radioactive nightmares. "Kate, if you can hear this, Thompson gave me the frequency." Michael's words carried the desperate love of a man who refused to accept that their story could end in an abandoned mine. "I know you think you have to die to save everyone, but there's another way. The plutonium isn't weapons grade, it's reactor fuel, depleted uranium that can't actually create the kind of dispersal device you're worried about." Kate's tactical mind raced through the implications while Zaitsev's face went white with fury in the emergency lighting that had flickered back to life. "Impossible," the arms dealer snarled. "The federal convoy manifest clearly listed weapons-grade fissile material stolen from the Kazakhstan facility." "That's what we wanted you to think," came Admiral Stone's voice through the same communication channel. "The entire convoy operation was a sting designed to flush you out of hiding. The real plutonium never left federal custody. What you've been building for the past 6 hours is an extremely expensive conventional explosive device with radioactive seasoning that couldn't contaminate a city block, let alone half a state." Kate felt the tactical situation shift beneath her feet like an earthquake rearranging familiar terrain. If the radiological threat was fabricated, if the entire operation had been designed to capture Zaitsev rather than prevent a genuine weapon of mass destruction, then her sacrifice was not only unnecessary, but counterproductive. The thermal detonation would destroy evidence that federal prosecutors needed to dismantle Zaitsev's entire international network. "You're lying," Zaitsev said, but his voice carried the hollow tone of someone whose world was crumbling around them. "My technical specialists confirm the isotopic signatures. The materials are genuine weapons-grade plutonium." "Your technical specialists," Admiral Stone replied with audible satisfaction, "have been federal agents for the past 8 months. Every piece of intelligence you've received, every technical assessment, every operational detail, has been carefully crafted to lead you exactly where we wanted you. The only genuine element in this entire operation has been Kate's response, which we needed to be authentic to maintain operational security." Kate lowered the thermal detonator, her hands shaking with adrenaline and the emotional whiplash of discovering that her wedding day sacrifice had been built on elaborate deception. Around them, the sounds of federal assault teams breaching the facility's upper levels echoed through the mining complex, but she felt only the hollow exhaustion that followed maximum stress operations. Martinez appeared at her shoulder, his tactical gear splattered with evidence of the firefight, but his expression surprisingly calm. "Ma'am, we need to secure the scene for evidence recovery, but first, there's something you should know about why Admiral Stone really reactivated you for this mission." Kate looked at him with growing suspicion. "Explain." "You were never the primary objective," Martinez said quietly. "Zaitsev was obsessed with proving he could outmaneuver America's most legendary Black Ops veteran, but federal intelligence needed him to reveal his entire supply network. The only way to get that information was to make him believe he was finally getting his revenge against Ghost 7. The revelation that she'd been used as bait in an elaborate counterintelligence operation should have triggered professional anger, but Kate felt only the relief that the radioactive threat had been neutralized and that her sacrifice was not required. Above them, the sound of helicopter rotors indicated that extraction was imminent, and somewhere in the distance she could hear Zaitsev's remaining mercenaries surrendering to federal assault teams. "Kate," Michael's voice returned to the communication system, carrying 3 years of love and the promise of a future that hadn't been destroyed after all. "I'm in the command helicopter with Admiral Stone. The church is still decorated, Father Rivers is still waiting, and if you want to finish what we started this morning, I'm ready when you are." Kate looked around the chamber that had nearly become her tomb, at the fake radiological device that had seemed so threatening just minutes earlier, at the evidence of Zaitsev's elaborate revenge scheme that would ensure his conviction on federal terrorism charges. Her modified wedding dress was torn, stained, and accessorized with enough military hardware to equip a small army, but beneath the tactical gear and combat damage, she was still the woman who'd been standing at the altar 6 hours ago.
"Martinez," she said, beginning to remove her tactical vest with hands that were finally steady again. "Please tell Admiral Stone that Ghost 7 is officially retiring. Again. And this time, it's permanent." 90 minutes later, Kate stood once more at the altar of Our Lady of Greece Chapel.
her wedding dress hastily cleaned and re-hemmed by a team of Navy seamstresses who'd been flown in specifically for the purpose. The congregation had waited with the patient faith of people who understood that some duties couldn't be postponed, even for weddings, and their faces showed only joy and relief as she took Michael's hands for the second time that day. Father Rivers, displaying the adaptability that had served him through decades of military chaplaincy before his civilian posting, simply resumed the ceremony where it had been interrupted. Into this holy union, Katarina Marie Thorne and Michael James Brennan now come to be joined, having already demonstrated their commitment under the most extraordinary circumstances. Kate squeezed Michael's hands gently, marveling at how normal they felt after hours of handling weapons and explosives. "I'm sorry about the interruption," she whispered, meaning it more deeply than any words could express. Michael smiled with the understanding of a man who'd married someone extraordinary, knowing that their life together would never be entirely predictable. "Just promise me one thing," he whispered back. "What's that?" "Next time someone needs to save the world," he said with gentle humor that carried infinite love, "let them find another bride." Kate laughed, the sound carrying clearly through the chapel and mixing with the relieved laughter of family and friends who'd witnessed something unprecedented in the history of interrupted weddings. "Deal," she promised, meaning it with every fiber of her being. Father Rivers pronounced them husband and wife as the Wyoming sun set behind stained glass windows, painting their faces in the same golden light that had blessed their interrupted ceremony hours earlier. When Michael kissed his bride, Kate tasted the salt of her own tears, not of grief or sacrifice, but of overwhelming gratitude for a second chance at the happiness she thought was lost forever. The reception lasted until dawn, filled with laughter, dancing, and carefully edited stories of where the bride had disappeared to between ceremony and celebration. Admiral Stone, in full dress uniform, gave a toast that mentioned nothing about classified operations, but everything about the courage required to choose love over duty, even when that choice seemed impossible. As Kate and Michael drove away toward their honeymoon together, she caught sight of herself in the passenger mirror, hair still perfect from the Navy seamstress's repair work, wedding dress immaculate despite its extraordinary day, but her eyes carrying new depth that spoke of someone who'd faced the ultimate test and chosen love over vengeance, hope over sacrifice, and the future over the past. Behind them, Cedar Falls settled into peaceful sleep, its residents never knowing how close they'd come to disaster or how their local librarian's secret past had been used to prevent it. The mountains stood silent under starlight, their mining tunnels once again abandoned to darkness and memory. And in a federal prison, Viktor Zaitsev began serving multiple life sentences while intelligence analysts dismantled his global network using evidence recovered from his elaborate revenge scheme that had backfired so spectacularly. Kate Brennan, she'd finally earned the right to use that name, settled into her husband's arms as they drove toward their new life together, knowing that this time her retirement was genuine. The ghost had finally found peace, and the woman she'd always wanted to be was free to write the next chapter of her story. Some wedding days end with cake and champagne. Kate's ended with justice served and a future reclaimed from the shadows of the past. It was, she reflected, as Michael's hand found hers across the center console, exactly the kind of unconventional beginning that their extraordinary love story deserved. The bride had returned, and this time, she was staying home. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.